There's two more points I'd like to bring up with regard to Kant's ideas that I think are rather important for understanding his aesthetic theories and the significance of his aesthetic theories. The first actually is it's a terminological point, but it's something that I think needs to be brought up. You will often hear, if you are studying Kant, or as you might be doing, looking up information about Kant on the internet, uh, the reference to what is called the Transcendental aesthetic. And you might look at this and read through the idea of the Transcendental aesthetic, and you're going to hear references to largely to space and time. And you'll wonder, well, space and time? I thought we were talking about art and the senses and stuff like that. What's space and time have to do with it? Okay, here's the connection with this. When Kant talks about the transcendental aesthetic, he's actually talking about something that has more to do with understanding, and specifically the way in which the mind goes through and establishes concepts. Transcendental, remember the condition for the possibility of things being the principle for the condition for the possibility, like we were talking about earlier. And then aesthetic, in that sense of the transcendental aesthetic, is something that has to do with the general capacity for aesthesis, the senses at all. So how is it that, given that we are sensing beings that see, smell, taste, touch, and hear, and live in embodied ways, how is it that we are capable of forming thoughts, that, given that we have these tools with which to assemble our thoughts? Okay. Now, when he talks about that, that's really in his first book, The Critique of Pure Reason, and we're not really looking at that so much. And I want to sort of give you a heads up on that, because there's another way in which he talks about the aesthetic, which we're talking about right here, with regard to judgment, with regard to taste, with regard to art, where he's trying to talk about the way in which we take these senses and then find meaning in the feelings that they provide us, the way in which we create, the way in which we sort of weave together the possibilities of our aspirations, whether it's in terms of art or even in terms of our wishes and imagination, right, with regard to our fancies. It's this aspect of what we might hope for, what we might look for, what it is that we can do with the feelings inside of us, with the imagination that we have, with the fancies that we have, and make something possible. It's that aspect of the aesthetic that we're talking about here. So that's something to keep in mind with it. Second thing I want to bring up with this too is this last, and I guess it's the last point I want to bring up about Kant for the time being, but I think it's important, which is, why does he do this? Why does he go through and develop this intricate theory of art and aesthetics, especially given that he uses the word aesthetic in a couple different ways, right? Well, I think it's this. First of all, there is the basic fact that our aesthetic encounter with the world for Kant is delightful to us. That we can see or taste or touch or smell or imagine, that we do this evokes a kind of delight, a sense of wonder and extraordinariness. It's a way in which we encounter and, I suppose, move through the world. I see it in some sense. It's a way in which we almost seem to move towards the horizons intellectually of what we can become through this. There is that which we must do because we are rationally obliged to do so. This is for Kant, is what he would say. And this would be involved with his ethics, found in his Critique of Practical Reason. There is that which we are bound to think by virtue of the limits of the structures of our consciousness, that we think in terms of space and time and various forms of judgment of the quantity and quality in relation to modality and all these sorts of things. That's in the Critique of Pure Reason, and actually in everything else. It's just part of his epistemology. All that's there, but that doesn't explain how it is that we come to have new ideas, that we come to see things as being new and important and real, and that we move ourselves and our souls and what we can be through our encounter with the world. It's by thinking about this aesthetic sensibility, right? By awakening us to the possibilities, the perpetual possibilities that can come from reflecting in the manifold of our own experiences, that we, I suppose, aspire and indeed flourish as human beings. It is, in an interesting sort of way, for Kant, one of the places where we find our freedom. It is not the only place where we find our freedom. Indeed, Kant will say that the place we find our freedom most is in our ethical life, when we rightly choose the moral law written on our heart, as he likes to famously say. But I would say that's not the only place for Kant. I would say that there's another place where we find our freedom. There's another place where we come to recognize what we may be, where we recognize our dignity. And that is in our creativity, in our imagination, in the way that we can take these different dimensions of our senses, have them wrapped together, and generate a whole new vision through a poem or music or even a new medium entirely, right? Maybe it's a video game. Maybe it's uh, some, I don't know, hologram, some new sensibility. And we know that because, and this is the last thing I'll leave you with, because when we make something that is truly beautiful, when we practice a fine art and touch that aspect of genius in us, it is not just that we have created something or seen the creation of genius in another and appreciated. It is that we see within this the way in which there is a kind of dignity, a kind of self-rule, a self-rightness, or to use the technical term, an autonomy to what is created in this work of art, whether it's done by us or done by another. We share in that dignity, that new creation that had to do and came about from the creative dignity and autonomy that is us. In short, I think that there is a way in which art moves us, and the aesthetic judgments that we have about the world come to move us, because there's a way in which we recognize the dignity in it as a reflection of the dignification, the coming to be dignified, and the coming to integrity of us and our imaginations as we move through the world.